This week on What in the World is Going On, we're going to be talking about Biden's possible re-engagement on the Iran nuclear deal. So stay tuned, friends. Fellow colleague Chris Catalca reported that on April 16th of this year, informing us of President Biden's possible re-engagement of the Iran nuclear deal. Chris reminds us that at the end of the Trump administration in January of just this year, America's Middle East allies were unified against Iran. That's Israel, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and all the other Sunni nations. They were all allied against Tehran. On top of that, America had severe sanctions, which added pressure that would ultimately force Iran to have to make hard decisions about its survival in the future. But now, President Biden is toying with releasing this pressure. And Chris goes on to say that I'll tell you what he'll find in Iran if he does. Nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Friends, it's hard to imagine that only a few months ago, the U.S. was Israel's greatest friend. Under the former administration, President Trump was the most pro-Israel president ever, and praise God for that. But now, friends, under a Biden administration, that friendship, I'm afraid, is growing colder and colder. Why would you backtrack on the progress that was made in the Middle East on normalizing relations with Israel? Why would you not continue to foster that progress and momentum that was created? Why instead would you choose to re-enter the Iran deal to once again try to appease Iran, who continues to shout, "Death to America, death to Israel"? Friends, it makes no sense. Furthermore, Iran is demanding the U.S. to compensate the regime billions of dollars for the sanctions imposed by President Trump and his decision to withdraw from the 2015 nuclear accord. Will the U.S. agree? Well, I guess time will tell. But may I remind you that under the Obama administration, over $400 million in cash was flown over to Tehran, and over $160 billion was released in frozen assets, which did nothing more than fund the number one state sponsor of terror. And here we are looking to repeat those same mistakes. It's not good. That's not good. And so who knows, the U.S. may very well give in to Iran's demands. I guess time will tell. But meanwhile, Israel seems to find herself alone once again, alone to battle Iran, to see that they do not achieve a nuclear weapon. And so far, they seem to be doing a fairly good job. But most of the world, friends, could care less. In fact, they seem to show more sympathy for Iran than they do for Israel. And that reminds me of what the prophet Zechariah wrote some 2,500 years ago, of how one day God will gather all nations to battle in Jerusalem. And he's going to enter into judgment with them there for doing so. Zechariah chapter 14, verses 1-3. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. But then look at verse 3. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations. And so woe unto the nations, as they have no idea what they're heading for, when they stick their noses in God's affairs and would rather support those who hate Israel than for those who want to make peace with her. Woe unto you, nations! And so, friends, let us continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Let us continue to pray for our leaders to make godly decisions. And let us continue to pray for the U.S. not to re-enter the failed, disastrous Iran nuclear deal. So until next time, friends, this has been What in the World is Going On with the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry. Have a great night.